Hi, everyone. It's Journey Armand from Flipgrid. I'm head of educator innovation at Flipgrid, and I'm so happy that you're joining us today for a conversation all about digital citizenship. And our mission at Flipgrid is our community's mission to empower every learner on the planet to share their voice and to respect the diverse voices of others. And we know how digital citizenship plays a huge part in that mission. Today, I am so excited because we are going to talk about the role that media literacy plays when it comes to digital citizenship. And I have a special guest with me from our partner, News Literacy. And I just messed up the name really quickly, but News Literacy Project. We have Peter Adams with us from the News Literacy Project. Peter, welcome so much. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your organization with our amazing educators today.
Sure. Thanks, Journey. My name is Peter Adams. I head the education team at the News Literacy Project. I'm a former classroom teacher, former adjunct instructor at the college level, after school instructor, and then I've been with NLP now more than 11 years. So we've really done this work for quite some time, but have hit a kind of inflection point with resources, including our collections on Flipgrid, that I'm excited to talk about.
So as we get started, the first question I would love to ask is, what is news literacy and why is it so important to digital citizenship?
Yes, for sure. News literacy is really about recognizing the role that information and the First Amendment play in our lives and in democracy, and helping students, foster that understanding and helping them differentiate between different types of information, right? Students are encountering all sorts of content every single day in a very rapid stream, some of it targeted at them. And they really need the ability to determine the credibility of that content, especially news, right? Standards-based news, and then to use and learn the standards of authoritative fact-based journalism to really decide what to trust, share, and act on. So unless we help students understand what makes journalism credible, what good sourcing looks like, what fairness looks like in practice, they can't really make those assessments on their own. So this is so foundational to digital citizenship because information is so foundational to everything we do. It's the basis for all of our decisions, our ideas about the world around us, the actions we decide to take, and because there are legions of bad actors out there who really work to mislead people in ways that do harm. Everything from anti-vaccination propagandists to white nationalists and other extremists to foreign agents who are really trying to exacerbate and inflame social divisions, promote authoritarianism, and lead us astray. So we really owe it to our students to equip them to navigate all of that.
Absolutely, Peter. And as an educator, I know sometimes it might be challenging. Sometimes we want our students to go out and search for information that they can use for in-classroom learning opportunities. But they also need to be critical of the information that they find and know whether that information is not only relevant, but also real, because there's so much information out there. And so we know that there's tips and tricks and strategies that we can teach our students to identify information that will be better to use versus others for their purposes. So my next question is really about the role of bias. We know bias is a part of ourselves. It's a part of media. It really is a natural part of life. But what role does bias play in the media that our students are consuming?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that really depends on what kinds of media students are turning to or are exposed to on a regular basis. Bias is a really complex but important topic, and it's commonly weaponized and politicized in our discourse. So it gets thrown around quite a bit, and that can be really confusing for folks. And I think, it results in a lot of misunderstanding. So, for example, too many people think that bias in the news is malicious and intentional and overt, when in fact it's almost always, at quality outlets, incidental and perceived and highly debatable. And our own biases, as you mentioned, we're all humans. Everybody has biases. Everybody has life experiences that have formed their judgments. We bring those to the table when we consume news. So two people can look at the same news report and see different and often even opposing biases. And that's because our own biases get mixed up in our experience of news and other media. So everybody loves to hate the media, but no one thinks the media is biased in a way that favors them. And there are reasons for that. And I think that also warrants, a nuanced sort of critical conversation and consideration of bias. So, I like to think of biased information as information that is unfair, inaccurate, and distortive. And this isn't really a binary. It's not like there's perfect information and biased information, but there is more bias or less biased information, right? So there's information where there is no discernible bias, where it's been minimized, and then there's overtly biased information. So thinking in those terms, I think, can really, really help students navigate all the different sources that come at them, and they're not all playing by the same rules, and that's sort of a key consideration.
I love that point that you made, that it's like a continuum.
Right.
And really, we need to allow students to recognize that and see where it's coming in a little bit more than other places. And of course, organizations try their best to minimize in certain ways. And so thanks for bringing that to our attention. And I know that you have some lessons that educators can easily use to teach their students about bias in the media. So I'm going to just share really quickly the screen where we see here, this is News Literacy Project's partner page inside of Discovery. You can access their organization's website right from our Discovery page. But what you'll also find is that there's an awesome collection called Understanding Bias. And here are 13 topics to help teach your students about different types of bias. So Peter, if you don't mind speaking a little bit about some of these topics and why are they really important to implement in our classrooms?
Yeah, for sure. So bias was far and away the topic that we got asked about the most from educators. It's a thorny topic, and as you mentioned, and as we've discussed, our own biases get mixed up in our perceptions of things. So, like, how can you steer students through this? So we developed a kind of framework for thinking about and teaching about bias in news media, separated into types and forms. So most people, when they talk about bias, are usually referring to partisan bias, but there's also the potential for demographic bias, especially if newsrooms aren't diverse enough, which is a really big problem in newsrooms across the country. There's the potential for corporate bias or bias in favor of corporate ownership or a parent company. Again, whether intentional or incidental or subconscious. There's the potential for bias toward a big story, for example. So we lay out these different types. We have 5 of them. And then we think about the forms those biases.
Big story bias.
The forms those biases could take, whether that's word choice and tone, whether that's the kinds of stories that are selected to be covered as news, the news judgment, or the way a story is sourced. So these give students kind of concrete things that they can do to move past an initial perception of bias. I'm fond of saying to educators that a perception of bias in news is the beginning of inquiry, not the end, so that they can really drill down and think, is this bias? Well, let's find out. What type would it be if it were, and what form is it taking, and how could it have been better? So they can fix the headline if they think there's a loaded language, for example, or they could look at the sourcing and say, here's the voice that's missing. That gives much more concrete and empowering things for students to do as a response to things they see.
And I absolutely love how your topics are organized. So it gives students an overview and understanding with a video of what the content actually is that they're actually learning. And then it gives them a piece to interact with so that they can really take their learning and put it into action, and then a reflection piece. So in this example, they're looking at big story bias and they're reflecting on what could the journalist who got this story wrong have done differently to avoid big story bias. So it really is allowing students to be critical thinkers, using real stories that have happened. And so a very authentic way for students to learn and grow in this area. So kudos to your team for creating these wonderful resources for educators. And talking about critical thinking, the one thing I would love to hear more about is how might we as educators help students be critical thinkers and consumers of information?
For sure. Yeah, I think a few things. I think one, we have to make sure that students know, again, that not all information and information sources are equal. It's true that no source of information is perfect, but there are, dramatic differences between sources of information, and helping students home in on those is really, really important. There are really distinct differences, for example, between user-generated content that's published anonymously online, overtly partisan websites that really have no concern for the truth. They're just out to score partisan points. And then standards-based news organizations that aspire to be fair, accurate, transparent, and accountable. they respond to errors, they correct them, they respond to letters to the editor. That's evidence that a news organization, however imperfectly, is at least trying to be fair and accurate and transparent, and to meet the information needs of its audience. That doesn't mean we can't respond when they make a misstep. So I think those are some of the keys, and we really have to strike a balance here. I think if the only time we talk about critical thinking and news media, it can make students cynical. It can make them think that all journalism is problematic, that all journalism is biased, if that's your topic, or unfair in some way. So we really have to also hold up exemplary pieces of journalism to say, here's an example of a news report done well, so that we set a standard for students that they can apply, as they navigate today's information environment and as they make decisions about what to believe in their daily lives. And so, again, I think that a lot of journalists out there really strive to be fair. They work hard to be impartial, and to provide appropriate context. We just have to help students sort of recognize that work when they see it.
Absolutely. And you have even more resources. So looking at these collections, there's a collection all about how to know what to believe and misinformation. And so once again, every single collection inside of News Literacy Project's partner page will have really amazing topics that will teach students about the topic, but also give them other resources to explore. So here you see there's posters available and some tips for students. Photo fact check. I think that was one of my favorite topics that I looked at, to see whether or not photos on the internet are actually real, right? And so giving students those strategies, wow, I can tell educators love this topic. It's been used 129 times already and has sparked 19 hours plus of engagement. So this is one, if you're looking to get started, this could be a really great topic to get started in this area. And then once again, as we continue on, I know your organization has other resources available. So Peter, if you don't mind sharing other resources or tips to further have educators, students, and families teach media literacy.
Great. Yeah. So, and the Flipgrid collection is a perfect place to start because it springboards into all of our other resources, which are all no cost, by the way, to educators. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit. So we make this stuff as accessible for educators as possible. So a lot of what you'll find in the collection is based on content that is in our Checkology virtual classroom. So if you want to go further, this is a collection of about 14 in-depth lessons. We're adding a number of new lessons in the upcoming school year, along with deliberate practice sets and challenges, fact-checking tutorials and things, so students can develop those kinds of skills to suss out a false context photo, for example, as you mentioned. So that lives at checkology.org. It's free to register for. Your students can have accounts, choose to go that route. We also have a resource library on our website with more traditional resources like lesson plans and infographics that you can use in the classroom. We have a weekly email newsletter through the school year called The Sift. It's very timely. It's focused on what happened last week that you can use in the classroom to teach news literacy this week. It always has some classroom-ready elements, discussion prompts, and other suggestions that teachers find helpful. It's also helpful as just a professional development newsletter for yourself if you want to just up your game in terms of your news and information literacy savvy. And then we have a mobile app called Informable that's in the Android and Apple App Store. Those develop kind of news literate habits of mind. They're collections of examples where students have to say, this is an ad or not. This example presents strong evidence for its claim or not. This is a fact-based statement that I could check. This is an opinion-based statement that cannot be checked, and so on. So these are just really important dispositions that help students, dig in. And then there's lots of other topics, as you mentioned, in our Flipgrid collection, infographics about how to navigate polarization. That'll be our next one that comes up. An infographic about how to talk back to people in your feeds who share misinformation. Lots of stuff about standards of journalism, effective Google searching, fact check missions, and then several about misinformation, how to think critically about it and how to help students recognize it when they see it.
Awesome, Peter. And so Educators, we definitely want you to stay connected and ask those questions. So this is Peter's Twitter handle. Feel free to get connected with Peter, and any learnings and any excitement that you have for the resources that were shared today. If you try something out in your classrooms, definitely share it on social media. Use the hashtag FlipGrid4All so that we can continue to learn with you. And Peter, thank you so much for spending some time with us today so that we understand a little bit better about how to really approach media and how we can equip our students to be critical thinkers of the media that they consume, to be the best digital citizens. So with that being said, to all the educators out there, go forth and empower every voice, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.